ruminating about the relationship, the gaslighting, the invalidation, the hurtful words, the lying, or maybe even the cheating. It pulls you out of your life. You may not be as present as you could be. You're not as mentally sharp as you could be. And you aren't as clear-headed. You get lost in this dismissive world you live in, and you can't think about or pursue the things that matter to you. Do you ever find yourself sort of double and triple checking yourself, almost to the point where you're like, did I lock the door? Did I turn off the heater? Did I turn off the heat curling iron? Did I turn off the stove? Like that kind of second guessy stuff. Give me a yes in the comments if that's the case with you. Not like full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder, like you might be washing your hands or checking locks a lot. I mean like this sort of, you're sort of these nagging doubts in you that you're just like, did I do this? Did I do that? Like, let us know in the comments. It'd be interesting to know that. But, and as always, before we go forward, please welcome to this channel. If you are not already subscribed, I would love to have you join us. But today what I'm going to take on is this the critical key dynamic of narcissistic abuse or narcissistic relationships, of gaslighting, but what it does to us over time. So let's go from there. Gaslighting really, really fuels a chronic sense of uncertainty in all of us. Now, people who have experienced narcissistic relationships or narcissistic abuse do not trust themselves. It's probably one of the hallmark symptoms. People who've experienced narcissistic abuse are riddled with self-doubt, confusion, and constantly second-guess themselves. You'll ask yourself, like, are you sure? Maybe I was wrong about that. Let me double check. There's a lot of that kind of self-talk. Now, people who have been through narcissistic abuse will rarely stand their ground. And when someone questions them, even when the person questioning them is not a narcissist, the person who's been through narcissistic abuse will often go and Google things or double check things because they are unwilling to hold their position with conviction unless they've got facts backing them up, right? They always need to get that little extra information. It can get to the point where survivors feel as though they have sort of a low-grade manifestation of the symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder. Doing things like double and triple checking locks, questioning themselves 10 times, I don't know, about whether they remember to pack something like a toothbrush or their passport or something, and literally something going home and double checking. They might read a term paper 10 or 15 times before they submit it because they're concerned they didn't get it right. They may read the same sentence over and over again because of disruptions in concentration, or maybe I didn't understand it right. Another thing people who experience narcissistic abuse may do is keep asking reassurance from other people repeatedly. Did I do it right? Are you sure? How did I do? Can you let me know how I did? I'm not so sure I did so well. Now, another common pattern in survivors of narcissistic relationships and narcissistic abuse is actually, interestingly, perfectionism. And it's a perfectionism that's designed to soothe the survivor's anxiety. Not even necessarily to look perfect to the world, maybe the way a narcissist does. A person who experiences narcissistic abuse will obsess over everything, from getting a cake right, just right for the party they're going to, or choosing exactly the right gift for someone, or trying to keep their house perfectly clean and organized, or always being prepared for every kind of disaster and every kind of problem. The perfectionism becomes a way of managing the anxiety that arises from feeling confused and feeling full of self-doubt, right? Something you can control. The perfectionism becomes a tool or a defense in order to create order and a sense of mental control in an otherwise chaotic mind. You're like, look, at least I have alphabetized my laundry room. There's at least one part of your life that feels in control. Now, and the main culprit in all this sort of obsessive and compulsive behavior in people who've experienced narcissistic abuse is the chronic exposure to gaslighting. The core of gaslighting is to have your reality denied or manipulated. And by everything, I mean, that means having your emotional state manipulated, people doubting whether or not you're hungry, doubting where you put the keys. Everything gets questioned. If a person was raised with a narcissistic parent, self-doubt becomes a way of life. Gaslighting is an indoctrination into self-doubt and the need to feel like you have to turn to someone else or many other someone else's to get reassurance, because there's so much doubt you have in your own abilities because of your narcissistic parent or parents. To me, frankly, it is one of the worst legacies of narcissistic abuse and gaslighting, because it brings such an inefficiency into a person's life if they're always second-guessing themselves. It's a waste of time to triple check everything, to always go back and see if you changed the lock, because you doubt yourself in so many ways. Now, the bigger legacy of this is that you hold yourself back from bigger opportunities. Yes, it's a waste of time to read a paper a third time or fourth time or 10th time, or triple check whether or not you put your keys back on the hook. But when the self-doubt extends into the realm of opportunity, that really is the tragedy. All of your second guessing means that you may not go for that really good job, or you may not apply to that graduate school or apply for that promotion. Lifetime gaslighting leaves you thinking that you're overreaching if you try to advance yourself. You start telling yourself that you aren't smart enough or strong enough to go for it. You don't feel like you can handle it, because those are the messages you've internalized from a lifetime of gaslighting. So you don't go for it. And you stay in a job or a relationship or something that may even be a little lower than your ability, because that easier job is comfortable. And when you spent years of your life being gaslighted, wanting to be comfortable in a job that you can do very easily, it actually makes sense. But sadly, that does mean restricting your potential. And we don't get to see all the gifts of people who hold themselves back. People who are chronically gaslighted internalize the background noise of doubt in their lives that is a constant presence. People who've been gaslighted chronically are much more likely to say no to opportunities, more likely to assume that they are wrong, more likely to take the blame or the fall for something, even when they're not responsible. Because growing up, if they were scapegoated, they got used to doing that. For those of you who have experienced narcissistic relationships and narcissistic abuse, and you wonder if you actually, though, truly have the symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, the full-on disorder, such as checking behaviors, reassurance seeking, adhering to compulsive rituals and order, it is actually quite important that you do get a mental health consultation or speak with a mental health professional to rule out whether you have what would meet the true diagnostic criteria for OCD. Now, when we're talking about full-on OCD, we're talking about symptoms that are intense and time-consuming enough. But in many cases, for people who just find themselves plagued by self-doubt in dozens and dozens of small ways like always double-checking themselves, always asking other people because they don't trust their own memory, trying to do, for example, as much as they possibly can for other people or at work. You know, the person always goes that extra mile or 20 miles so they can feel more confident that they did everything, that they gave their all, because otherwise they're concerned they won't be good enough, or getting stuck in all the time wasting and all the perfectionism. And you have also experienced the rigors of narcissistic abuse and narcissistic relationships. Recognize that some of these seemingly sorts of obsessive and compulsive patterns may also very well be a downstream effect of the gaslighting that happens in narcissistic abuse. The sad, really, tragedy is the number of people who have had narcissistic, antagonistic, high conflict parents, partners, or anyone else in their lives where they were convinced of this idea, if I could just get it right, then it'll all be fine. And then people from these kinds of histories waste lifetimes trying to get it just right. It's not possible. Narcissists move the goalposts all the time. There is no such thing as enough. Their insecurity means nothing is ever enough. A narcissistic personality is a bottomless vessel with holes in the bottom. Not you, not anyone, not any experience is ever going to adequately fill them. And in the meantime, you are wasting time getting lost in the details. Obsessions, that sort of those constant thoughts that, like, for example, you forgot something, you missed something, you didn't do something right. And compulsive sorts of behaviors, like constantly checking and doubting and seeking reassurance, are actually all quite common patterns that are seen for a very long time over the years in people who have survived narcissistic abuse, years after they even get out of the relationship. And they can persist long, long after the narcissist is out of your life. Let those imperfections happen in your life in small ways. Sometimes don't make your bed. Stand your ground when you're pretty sure that you're right. Don't feel like you need to be all things to all people. I have to be very, very frank and personal with you. Of all the, I mean, I've been, again, obviously I've been around the block on narcissistic relationships in my life in various realms, at work and family and in past close relationships. I have to tell you, the gaslighting, it's actually probably my biggest issue. I often do ask for reassurance. My team sometimes wants to choke me, like, you did fine, it was right. I'll often doubt myself. I'm like, I thought I put it here, and then I'll doubt myself. No, you didn't put it there. And I'll second guess what I said. And even when I know something really, really, really well, like really well, if somebody questions me, I'll immediately assume I'm wrong. Like, this is a long, long legacy. I've actually been like this since I was a kid. And I understand why that is. So for me, it's the one thing I can't shake. And I've seen it come up over and over and over again in clients who will keep doubting themselves. I have to say that even as I have built out my professional presence, for me, it's almost like an act of defiance to believe in what I'm doing. Because mostly I'm like, well, I missed that one thing in that video, or I didn't write that one thing down. And remember, I always say, surround yourself with good people. I'm lucky. I'm surrounded by good people. Like, no, you got it. We were listening. It's fine. So those things help me. But I'm telling you now that these legacies do leave they stay with us. They're like echoes that don't quite fade. And instead of letting that stop us, we can find little fixes and hacks in our world to help us get past those uncertainties. And I have no doubt you can too. So if any of you have these sorts of, just like I do, I'm a lock checker and I am a passport, like thinking I'm a passport forgetter. I always think I've forgotten my passport and I never have. But if you have any of those quirks and you feel comfortable sharing them, I know sometimes your name are in the comments and you don't want to share it, drop it, because I'm telling you now, I could probably 50% of the time when I'm driving to the airport, I will stop the car and have to go take apart my suitcase. And bless the people who are like, oh my gosh, this is her little tradition, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Because after a lifetime of gaslighting, self-doubt is my middle name. And I'd like it not to be yours. I'm going to reflect on something that I've seen happen over and over again. I've talked about this in other videos, and I talk about a loss of potential, but this is something that isn't even as big as a loss of potential. What I'm seeing is that people who experience narcissistic abuse become incredibly inefficient. And when you're inefficient, that takes a toll on other things in your life. You may not perform as well at work, or you just may not get things done in the same way. And then ultimately, it can hold you back in your life. So let's take this question on. How does narcissistic abuse, or why does narcissistic abuse make you so inefficient? Again, how if you want to get me angry, it's easy. Just talk about all the lost potential in people who have experienced narcissistic abuse. It's becoming increasingly clear to me what one of the primary mechanisms of why people lose some of that potential. And it's because narcissistic abuse does make people so inefficient. Anyone who has experienced the chronic invalidation and the challenges posed by having a narcissistic parent or parents knows that the self-doubt, the second guessing, the I'm not good enough, or the constant echoing in your ears and your mind from the parent who says, who do you think you are, putting yourself up for that opportunity, just froths up your imposter mentality. All of this anxiety and rumination distracts you and makes it that much harder to give yourself the mental and the psychological space you need to pursue your goals or just get through your day. You may actually end up downgrading your goals, talk yourself out of stuff, but most importantly, the time spent trying to talk yourself out of the anxiety or the doubt or the manipulation and actually attempting something, it wastes time. And now you're behind in the race called life. And if you think of it as a race, it helps. A person who didn't have a narcissistic parent, but instead was blessed with more support, more encouragement, or just being a part of a more functional family and having functional parents, when they grow up and become adults, they can let go of that system. They can individuate and grow and develop and create an adult relationship with their parents that isn't based on guilt and manipulation. Those people are often really better off in terms of jumping off the starting line as soon as the race begins. But for those who have experienced narcissistic abuse, it takes a minute. Like, wait, do I have the right to start running the race? And what if I start the race wrong? And if I win, will my father be jealous? If I don't win, will my mother reject me? By the time you process that psychological mess, you're still in the starting gate and everyone else is already running ahead of you. You don't have a chance of catching up. There's also the inefficiency that comes from the guilt that can often accompany a narcissistic family system. One issue is that you can get stuck in that guilt and often spend so much time worrying about the people you left behind, a healthy parent or a kinder parent or a sibling, or you're trying to set boundaries all the time with that family. Again, all of that effort contributes to an inefficiency. And this inefficiency is a part of all narcissistic relationships. If you are in an intimate relationship with a narcissist, ruminating about the relationship, the gaslighting, the invalidation, the hurtful words, the lying, or maybe even the cheating, it pulls you out of your life. You may not be as present as you could be. You're not as mentally sharp as you could be. And you aren't as clear-headed. You get lost in this dismissive world you live in, and you can't think about or pursue the things that matter to you. And if these patterns are lifelong, these narcissistic relationships are lifelong, it can be a lifelong legacy of being treated like this by a parent and then being distracted in school to such a degree that it did impact your academic performance. And as you went on, you may have been more limited in the options you could have taken because you were always so anxious as a child. Many people who experience narcissistic abuse blame themselves for everything first. It's my fault. I'm the one who's slow. I'm dumb. I'm a mess. In many ways, this way of thinking allows people to avoid that cognitive dissonance. Hey, if you're the one who's so slow-witted, then maybe it makes you more able to justify why the narcissist treats you so badly. But if you can view it through a framework of inefficiency, then I'm hoping you can have some self-compassion and break through these cycles. You're not dumb. You're just buried under all of this negative talk. The other thing that bears mention is that people who experience chronic narcissistic abuse honestly have sympathetic nervous systems that are always going off and that aren't cooperating either. The sympathetic nervous system is our fight, flight, freeze system. And as Pete Walker has so cleverly stated, it's actually our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn system. And people who experience narcissistic abuse really get that. It's when you get activated, your sympathetic nervous system's like, rah! You actually might find yourself fawning over the narcissist. But this sympathetic nervous system is terrible for our brains. It distracts us because when we are in crisis, We can't be fully focused or doing our work or focus on what's meaningful. We're always firefighting. We're always managing crises. And under those circumstances, not only are we exhausted, we hold ourselves back. And if you think of this from the perspective of mental bandwidth, when you are in a relationship with a toxic person or a narcissist, you waste a lot of your mental processing resources, your psychological bandwidth, as it were, on processing all of these negative feelings and emotions that this relationship brings up for you. You ruminate and waste time trying to figure it out and what to say and how to get out, or whatever you're struggling with. And that means that you're not able to process other more important information like feelings and thoughts related to things that matter to you. And the way all of this overtakes us in a narcissistic relationship makes us inefficient. Let's think of it this way. If the TV is on and loud music is on and we're in the middle of a loud party, you wouldn't be able to be working on your taxes. You couldn't pay attention. It's the same way with the constant loud noises of narcissistic abuse in your head. So many people experiencing narcissistic abuse devalue themselves and criticize themselves for their inefficiency. It can help to observe where this comes from. It comes from inefficiency. So what are you supposed to do? This isn't easy, because when someone treats you badly, it does get stuck in our mind. One thing is to have things to do that compel you and interest you, whether that's work, a hobby, a side gig, people you talk with, things you do around your home. If you can just jump into a new activity that kind of absorbs you, that can shift your attention. And that means on the good days, you need to cultivate those interests and skills. Mindfulness helps too, just being able to stay in a moment without spending time ruminating about the thing that already happened with the narcissist. And some of the classical techniques I've shared with you of not personalizing and recognizing that the narcissist gaslighting, their meanness, and all the rest of it are about the narcissist and the narcissist insecurity and their need to dominate. And honestly, you just had the bad luck to be in their crosshairs. This becomes the work of acceptance. Yeah, this is happening in your life, and no, it does not define you, and then you can just kind of put it down. This inefficiency you feel and you experience is real, and it really is devastating to observe how many people's lives have been slowed down or held back by it. You may sometimes wonder, how much further would I have gone in my life if I hadn't always been hearing those invalidating voices and double and triple and quadruple guessing myself about everything? Wondering about what if at some level is pointless. But instead of wondering, perhaps what is more useful is to start finding ways to disempower those voices and take back your efficiency. Get things done that matter to you, and recognize that the best way to fight back on narcissistic abuse is to achieve on your own terms. And listen, the narcissists are never going to congratulate you. They'll never see it. They'll never get it. And that's okay. In a world as busy as ours, with all the demands we have, and especially at this time of history, we all do need to be a little more efficient just to get through the day. When you're not efficient, always be kind to yourself first. But then I think it's important to also figure out ways to also clear some of this out. Again, I've been through this, and I am often struck by how much time I waste before I'll, for example, launch a new venture. I'll doubt myself, I'll second guess myself. I have a team that's exquisitely patient with me, and they'll gently say, no, we can do this, no, you can do this, but it takes me a while to push those voices out. And I do actually sometimes hold regret about how much time I wasted and how much more I could have done earlier. But at some level, it's acceptance, and I do the things I do now, but it took me a while to get here. I don't want it to take as long for you. So clip those inefficient strings and let yourself go. Generate that acceptance and keep pushing forward. So many people feel like, oh my gosh, I can't even make a decision anymore. And then that leads to the self-blame, right? But did you have this, or do you have this experience that you still find it hard to make decisions? Maybe you feel stuck or frozen, and you keep going back and forth, or ruminating or second guessing. I don't know what to do, right? That kind of thing. Folks who grew up with narcissistic parents have often found that they have always struggled a little bit with decision making since an early age. Not sure what to wear, or what activity to do, or what flavor popsicle to get. You might wonder, why is that? Well, the stealing of individuation and identity that is the narcissistic relationship contributes to that. The child doesn't exist separately from the parents. They exist for the narcissistic parents. The child's meant to be supply for the parents, and a separate reality is not permitted. What that does is that it percolates a sense of self-doubt in the child. There was never the opportunity for the child to feel that they get to be themselves. So that means knowing preferences or feeling confident or definitive in a choice is really, really hard. As the child gets older, it may show up in difficulties in making choices around choosing peers, classes in school, where to go to school, what to do when they graduate, what major, what job. It just feels harder. And the chronic second guessing can not only be exhausting, then there can be a wave of regret once a decision is made, with the person saying, I think I chose the wrong one. But this is not limited to just people who grew up with narcissistic parents. We observe it in people who have had narcissistic partners, especially when it has been a long-term relationship. You hear it enough times, right? You sure about that? I don't know. It doesn't seem like you know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. You didn't remember that, right? That didn't happen. That happens enough. You doubt yourself at a deep, deep level. Then there is the other issue that, let's say, in a given choice, or in a given situation, you make the wrong choice in a situation. We're all going to do it sometimes. You chose the wrong road to drive down, or the wrong hotel, or the wrong refrigerator, or the wrong college. And yeah, it doesn't go well. Well, let me tell you that narcissistic person will be there for the rest of your life with bells on to remind you repeatedly and rub your nose in it for eternity at how you made a mistake, and I told you so, and what were you thinking? And this can go on for years. So when you throw all of that together, the loss of confidence in your abilities, the loss of identity, the self-doubt, the confusion, the anxiety, the fear of regret, and then the fear that if you do make the wrong decision, that you will be blamed forever, then it becomes pretty clear how and why you would just freeze up like that and it's hard to make a decision, right? The issue then becomes that folks who come through the other side of narcissistic relationships will often have a self-conception of themselves as indecisive or terrible at making decisions or wishy-washy. I'm not sure that it's true. That's actually true of you, right? As you come out of a narcissistic relationship, or even if you don't get out of the relationship, you're still in the narcissistic relationship, but now that you recognize what their personality is about and you do the work of radical acceptance, you then may slowly see that they were peddling a false narrative all along, and you slowly give more and more space and possibility to your sense of self. If you do get out of a significant narcissistic relationship and find that once you are out of the control of that relationship and you are making more independent decisions, that it can feel almost dizzying to be in that situation and have the freedom to make these decisions, but not always in a good way. You may feel ill-equipped to make decisions, still find yourself going back and forth, doubting and second-guessing yourself, and still hear their voice inside your head. So when it comes to kind of feeling more on track with decisions, start small. Start by making decisions where there's no audience that will be affected by your decision, like what grocery store should I go to? Should I get the generic or the name brand? Should I make myself pasta or a sandwich? Small decisions that are just for you, low stakes, where you don't worry about the judgment of others. Pay attention to your intuition and instincts, what feels righter. As you start doing that more and more, and you may have to, if you are now living alone or apart from the control of the narcissistic person, then go bigger. Maybe you pick the restaurant for the group. When people face the prospect of making their own decisions after getting out of a narcissistic relationship, it can feel like a lot. If you have been told that you aren't capable of something for so long, it requires sheer will to get to a place where you believe that you can. But you aren't alone if you left that narcissistic relationship feeling like you suck at making decisions. You don't. But when there's enough self-doubt and gaslighting in your life, when your identity can't develop, making a decision can feel like an impossible and high-stakes game. When I was thinking about this video, I was very struck. I was thinking about how did this play out in my life since I was young. I remember, and it was interesting because if you really sat down and did this exercise, there's things you know about yourself, and yet you still make a different decision. It doesn't sound like a ridiculous example, and I think I've even talked about this on this YouTube channel before, but I've forgotten, so probably you have too. We had the chance to pick out instruments we could play in the school band. I really wanted to play the flute. There was something that felt very delicate about it, and they got to hold their hands out like this and flute, flute, flute. It was in this nice little case. But a girl, and she was a nice girl, but it's just how I grew up that made this hard for me. There was a girl, and I had no sense of self, no sense of identity. And another girl who had a very strong sense of self and I really wanted to be friends with decided to play the clarinet. And would you know, what did she choose? The damn clarinet. I don't even like the clarinet. I still don't like the clarinet. In fact, these days, I see a clarinet, kind of feel it in my body. But flutes, I kind of get a little bit envious. Freud would have a field day with that, by the way. And I remember thinking, like, I don't want to do this. Now, did that again. Same thing, same girl. There were different classes we could take after school. One of the choices was like drama, and the other one was cooking. Well, needless to say, I wanted to do cooking. Mama loves some food here, right? Well, that gal wanted to do theater, so guess who does theater? I didn't want to be on the stage, so then I did theater instead of cooking. So I could have been a flute-playing chef right now, had I known myself. Did it end there? Oh, hell no. Even down to my decisions about graduate school. I screwed up the first time and didn't choose what was right for me, lost a year, and then had to move across the country to the blessing that was UCLA to come and get my PhD. That was the right place for me. I knew that all along. As I put this video together, I actually stopped and I'm like, I need to make a note of this. The number of times in my life in here, I knew the choice wasn't right. But I'm like, I don't know. I'm so indecisive, y'all, that as I think about my to-do list for the day, I have to coin flip to figure out should I do task A or task B. So let me tell you, this sticks around for a long time. And if anyone asks me if I'm decisive, I'd say no, but do you have a penny? And maybe I will be. So this gal who should be able to cook and play the flute and probably should have spent one less year in New York and many other things, I guess I learned from it. This journey got me to where I am. Still can't stand the clarinet. But it does, we definitely, this can go with us forever. And so I keep a penny in my pocket all the time to help me with those choices. And I regret how many times my indecisiveness got me into trouble. But slowly but surely we can pull out of it. I slowly have. You can too, but keep a penny in your pocket. So let's talk about an issue that's such an age-old issue, but is particularly relevant to survivors of narcissistic abuse. And I'll actually put it as a question. How many of you who are survivors of narcissistic abuse believe you have imposter syndrome? Drop it in the comments. Because I'm going to tell you what I believe. I believe that anyone who's experienced narcissistic abuse does end up with a case of imposter syndrome. So let's break down why. So I do believe that, yes, people end up developing imposter syndrome as a result of narcissistic abuse. So why is that? Let's just take a minute and break down imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is that sense that you will be found out as a fraud, that you don't belong, that you aren't qualified. It's the experience of feeling that other people are evaluating you as incompetent or unskilled or out of your game. It can leave people feeling anxious, holding themselves back, and the fear is often about being found out, whatever it means to be found out. It's the humiliation of being called out, and that fear can be enough to lead people to hold back or not even put themselves out there, or feel overwhelmed by anxiety when in any situation you feel like an imposter. Now, imposter syndrome can cut through all areas of life. Many people most pointedly experience it at places like work or school. At work, it can manifest as someone who believes that they aren't qualified for a job or they're in over their heads. In school, a person who feels incompetent in a more advanced class, or that they don't even belong at a school, especially if it's, more elite or more competitive school. It can show up when a person is shopping in a fancy store or in the lobby of a fancy hotel or any place where barriers of class and money may be at play. And underlying it all are thoughts of being called out and simply of being not enough. This can also happen in relationships, feeling you aren't enough or don't deserve. And this feeling can really be drawn out in a narcissistic relationship because they have such a good front game. Like, yikes, this person is really successful, really attractive, or really whatever they are. Ooh, I hope they don't see through me. Some people even feel like imposters in their own family systems. It doesn't matter how familiar a space is. Imposter syndrome is something that happens within us. The argument absolutely can be made, and I believe it's a very compelling argument, maybe because I'm making it, is that imposter syndrome is simply internalized depression and societal invalidation. And more often than not, it is societal. Systemic oppressions due to race, ethnicity, social class, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. Society and the systems that surround us do marginalize certain people, and those messages heard over a lifetime, and that anyone who's not from the group that holds the power internalizes that message and then feels like they're not enough and that they do not belong. And when people experience imposter syndrome, the challenge is we become really inefficient. We waste psychological energy. People inhibit themselves and they exhaust themselves with anxiety. Then it becomes a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. People who believe they are imposters often have less power. They may be more inhibited. As a result, they may not perform as well. And then the assumptions about them, and even the ones they hold for themselves, that they're imposters, are reinforced. So now all of that is a sort of standard approach to imposter syndrome. But you're wondering, lady, get to the point, well, how does all of this relate to narcissistic abuse? Being a person who experiences narcissistic abuse results in permanent imposter syndrome for the people who've experienced it. What does that mean? Think about it, a lifetime, or at least many, many years of being told that you aren't enough, that you aren't that smart, that you don't know what you're doing, that you aren't that important, of constantly being gaslighted. Over time, you internalize the messages of dismissiveness and invalidation and minimization, and that you're not mentally well and your reality doesn't even exist. Survivors of narcissistic abuse go through the world forever feeling incompetent. If you experience narcissistically abusive patterns in childhood, these patterns impacted your sense of self and identity and your sense of competence. Second-guessing and self-doubt became your primary psychological language, and that trails you into adulthood. Without exception, every survivor of childhood narcissistic abuse I have worked with felt incompetent in at least one area of their lives, and usually in more than that, in adulthood. And that resulted in a sense of otherness, that people could see that they are overcompensating, and of being an imposter. If you managed to get through childhood unscathed and started encountering narcissistic abuse in adulthood, while it may not be as imprinted on your psychological DNA, it still makes a strong impact and results in that imposter feeling. It may happen with a partner, a friend, or a mentor or boss. And as that gets internalized, you have that impostery feeling everywhere you go, work, socially, you name it, and it holds you back. And this has been the experience of most survivors, even after they get out of the narcissistically abusive relationship. The narcissist may go, but the imposter syndrome feeling stays. While not everyone who experiences imposter syndrome has been narcissistically abused, many have. For me personally, and I do consider myself the patron saint of imposter syndrome, I know where it began for me. The messaging from the beginning, not just from the world, but how I grew up, that I wasn't good enough, and my father and other male relatives wanted a boy. I'm not a boy. Checkmate. There's only so much I could have done about that. But hearing that messaging over and over, I didn't take the risks. I always felt I didn't belong amongst peers when I wanted to try new things like theater, singing, you name it. I didn't apply to the most competitive universities when it was time to go to college. I felt I wouldn't belong. And even recently, when I've been asked to speak at some amazing events, my last thought before I take the mic is this the audience that's finally going to see through me? I will spend hours and days prepping and studying and reading and researching. That's why I know so much, to offset the anxiety. And I know this so well. It's not the knowing. It's the sense of not belonging and the doubt and the fear of being viewed as incompetent. It's in my DNA. Enough people tell you in your life that you are incompetent or not valued over a lifetime, you believe it. But for me, the fight comes from my personal crusade of wanting to prove that survivors can pull the damned rabbit out of their hats, that with persistence, survivors will always get it done, even if we collapse into exhausted heaps afterwards. And I am blessed with a deeply patient team that listens to me ruminate for a while afterwards, after I make mistakes that I believe I made, and never talk about what went right. But these are the legacies that stay with us, that sense of never fully feeling comfortable in ourselves or the world. And for these reasons, fighting against narcissistic abuse is essential. We are losing too much potential with too many people walking around feeling like imposters. Narcissistic abuse clearly leaves a person feeling uncomfortable in their own skin, and that is also what imposter syndrome is. Not just being uncomfortable in our own skin, but uncomfortable in the world. As I said, and I am living proof, the only antidote is to spite that imposter inside of you and just get up and do it. Even as you believe that this is the day that the jig is up and you're going to be found out, you keep going. And yes, you will be very tired at the end of the day. I hope one day I leave a stage not feeling like I am an imposter, but I doubt that's going to happen. I just get up and keep fighting the good fight, because if I stop, then the narcissists win. And that feels worse than being an imposter. So please find that fight inside of you and fight it, and let that fight mobilize you. Narcissists, abusers, and manipulators want everyone to feel like an imposter, because then they can, in their entitled way, keep the world running in a way that works for them. So maybe if all of us are imposters, then none of us are. The grand irony is that the narcissists, with all of their insecurity, they may be the ones who feel like the biggest imposters of all. But since they rely on projection as their defense, they inject and infect us with their imposter syndrome, and they blithely go around leaving the rest of us doubting ourselves. The key to healing is for all of us to start building up our immunity to their toxic germs, working through that feeling and knowing that you are not alone. Every survivor of narcissistic abuse goes through imposter syndrome. It can help to know that lots of other people in the room feel like imposters too. Most of all, me. So I get this. Thanks again.